Chapter 19. The Bible Belt. From the moment Russ and I moved from St. Petersburg to Ruskin, Florida, we began attending the church his family belonged to, the First Southern Baptist Church of Ruskin. The pastor was Dr. Wally Beebe, known all over the South for his evangelical method of busing children to Sunday school. A large portion of these came from migrant camps. Most were African Americans who lived in temporary housing during the harvest season. It is hyperbole to use the word housing, as they could barely be called shelters. They were actually loosely constructed lean-tos with campfires as their only source of heat and means of cooking. Having lived all over California, I had never seen conditions such as these other than what was portrayed in National Geographic in third world countries. Mel, my father-in-law, and Russ drove buses while my mother-in-law, Pat, visited the children on Saturday to remind them the bus would be there the following day. Many of the children came in wearing old clothes and had runny noses and dirty faces. Pat didn't just remind them. She spent hours washing their little faces and wiping their noses before giving them a hug and a kiss. She went above and beyond what was expected of any volunteer. The children were always excited to see her. She had clothes, food, and candy she had purchased for them. She was generous to a fault, and Mel was always after her about how much she spent. That was her ministry, and she poured herself into it. Most of the students were sweet and loving. However, some were disruptive and malicious. One boy seemed particularly ruthless and cruel to the other children. When he was reprimanded, he would throw out his chin in defiance and dare you to correct him. He was tough, coming from one of the poorest migrant camps in Waimama. One Sunday he was missing and didn't come back for a couple of months. I was shocked when he returned. He had scars on his face and arms and sat quietly by himself in the last seat. When I inquired about it later, the children told me he was obnoxious with one of the men at the camp and was pushed into the fire. It was a sad reminder of how grave their situation could be and how important it was to reach them with the gospel. The church had less than 300 members. However, it sponsored a Christian school with grades starting at age 3. Classes were small, so the students received individual attention. Most were reading beginners' books before the age of 4. One year, while visiting in California, the wife of my oldest brother criticized me for putting our children in private school. She believed we did it as a status symbol, as most of the private schools in California were populated by wealthy families. The idea that this was a pretentious decision to elevate our social status never occurred to us. We were just scraping by. As a matter of fact, I worked in the church office to offset our girls' tuition. One Sunday service, the pastor stated, "I don't see any Mercedes-Benz or Cadillacs in the parking lot. I know our parents are sacrificing for their children's education." That one remark was like a breath of fresh air. We believed our children's future was more important than any expendable purchases we could have invested in. To supplement our income, Russ worked long hours and took on extra shifts at work, so he was not able to be as involved in serving the church as I was. Other than working in the church office, the Lord placed me in a position to head up the women's ministry. It was such a blessing to help teach these women and an enjoyable opportunity to spearhead the young married social events. We had a mock wedding to renew their vows, a progressive dinner using CB radios, multiple game nights, and couples parties. At the close of each event, the pastor always gave a gospel message. Planning and organizing these events was rewarding, but seeing the group grow in the Lord was priceless. I worked in the church office, which I especially appreciated on stormy Florida days. We lived in a modular home, so I felt safe in the brick church building. It was a sure fortress against torrential rains. Although tornado warnings were infrequent, it seemed on one occasion we were doomed to have one. Florida had monsoons and hurricanes, but tornadoes frightened me the most. As the storm raged, it seemed obvious we were on the verge of one. Cuget and Audrey, the other secretaries, tried to reassure me. "You don't have to worry," they said. "You can hear it coming from miles away. It sounds like the roar of a train." I could hear the storm raging around us. The wind howled and the rain beat down so hard we could barely hear each other talk. Suddenly, above the storm and off in the distance, I was terrified as I heard the blare of a loud whistle. "Tornado!" I screamed. I slid under my chair and ducked under the desk. Cuget laughed. "Jolene," she yelled above the storm, "that was a train, not a tornado." Cuget was a single, red-headed young woman who was as whimsical and quirky as I was. We quickly formed a close bond. However, her standards were far above mine. She was adamantly against attending movies. One evening, our nephew, Rick, and our daughter, Kim, both were 4 years old, wanted to see a cartoon at the picture show. We needed a babysitter for Jennifer, who was just a toddler, but Russ's family was not available, so we asked Cuget. We neglected to say where we were going. Afterward, as we parked our car, we tried to warn the children not to say anything. However, Rick had already jumped out and ran headlong toward the house. It was too late to stop him. He opened the door and cried, "We went to the movies," and throwing his arms wide open, exclaimed, "and saw a big bear." Cuget was furious. She was not about to forgive me. Years later, I caught up with her on the phone. She said of all the shenanigans we did together, that incident was the one she remembered best. We both had a good laugh.